Questions about airplanes registered in a tiny town.
What would be the advantage of listing them here?
You're putting a lot of people in jeopardy.
Concerns a broken system helps drug cartels, even terrorists.
You can conceal the ownership of planes.
A federal investigation, indictments.
I think this is a game changer.
Deborah, you have anything to say? Ending in a landmark trial, a conviction, and impacting drug smuggling thousands of miles away.
Major disruption to the cocaine flow.
The effect was immediate. Obviously, it was an investigation started by WFAA.
Let's go back to where our investigation started. In Onalaska, an East Texas town, nestled along the shores of Lake Livingston. Zachary Davies sells real estate in Onalaska. He's lived here all his life. Tell us about Onalaska.
Onalaska is a very small town. It's a very quiet little town. There's not a lot to do.
Would it surprise you to find out that there are more than 1,000 planes registered here in the city of Onalaska?
Yes. Why? Is there 1,000 planes? The majority of people here can't afford a plane.
Onalaska has a secret. When we began investigating, back in 2019, we found federal records showing more than 1,000 planes registered in this town. In fact, there were more planes registered here in tiny Onalaska than in big cities such as Seattle, San Antonio, San Diego, or New York City.
That's interesting.
So where were all those planes registered to in Onalaska? We discovered they were linked to these 2 P.O. boxes.
Okay.
And Onalaska doesn't even have an airport.
They're not physically here. Yeah, they're registering them here. Oh, wow.
Where's the catch to this?
The former mayor had no idea that many planes were registered in this town.
What would be the advantage of listing them here?
We contacted the Federal Aviation Administration, experts, and industry sources. Onalaska, we found, was the epicenter of a legal loophole, one that allowed foreigners to anonymously register their planes. Here's how. The FAA allows foreign nationals to get U.S. registration for their aircraft by transferring the title to a trust company. But if you check the FAA records, the aircraft are registered in the name of the trust company, in effect helping to hide the identity of the foreign owner. All U.S. registered planes have an N-tail number. So why is an N number valuable?
An N number is, especially if you're operating the airplane in and out of the U.S., it draws much less scrutiny.
There's a sense of confidence that, gee, the Americans must have approved what's going on here. It's got the stamp of approval of the United States of America.
But why would you pick on Alaska?
We wanted to know who was the owner of all those planes in Onalaska. Records show they were listed to Aircraft Guarantee Corp.
Right up here on the right? Chain link fence all the way around it?
Mm-hmm. It used to be based in Onalaska. Deborah Mercer Irwin owns the trust company. She bought it in 2014. The company moved to Oklahoma City, so we went there. Hi, is this the offices of Aircraft Guarantee Corp?
Yes.
Hi.
Okay. We'll be with you in just a minute.
Okay, thank you. We wanted to know, what did the company have to say about all those planes?
We must know who our clients are. We collect all of their passports, their addresses, where they're going to keep the airplane. We stay in contact with them throughout our service with them.
One of the complaints has been that terrorists and drug dealers, criminals are going to use it. What do you say to that?
I would find it very difficult for a criminal or a drug user to place their aircraft in trust, and why would they? Why would they want to provide all their personal information, their passports, their corporate documents to place an aircraft in trust?
So can criminals take advantage of trusts? Just look. We discovered criminal activity linked to Aircraft Guarantee's foreign owners. In court records, we found 2 aircraft guarantee planes cited in a 2012 federal drug smuggling investigation. And the Drug Enforcement Administration seized an airplane registered to the trust company in 2016. Though not charged in the money laundering and drug trafficking conspiracy, the real owner, a Mexican national, paid more than $500,000 to get the plane back from the U.S. government. And these are images of a plane that crashed into a home in Caracas in 2008, killing 7. The pilot was a twice-convicted drug smuggler. The plane? It was registered in the United States to Aircraft Guarantee Corp. The company never identified the real owner.
There's a fundamental problem. Under the auspices of the trust, you can conceal the ownership of planes. Details about the planes, details about who flies the planes.
In 2013, a helicopter registered by Aircraft Guarantee crashed into a golf course in Mexico.
I was never able to figure out the actual person who was responsible for that helicopter accident.
Attorney Ladsanger represented the families of 3 of the 5 people killed in the crash. He says he contacted Aircraft Guarantee, but got nowhere.
It is a classic case of ostrich head in the sand. They don't ask the questions because they don't want to know the answers.
Is this making America less safe?
Absolutely.
In a post-9/11 America, former FAA Special Agent Joe Guttheins questions why a loophole in the law still exists that lets foreigners hide their ownership of airplanes in so-called trusts, like the ones used by Aircraft Guarantee.
If you're a terrorist and you have a way of concealing ownership of a plane in the United States, you're going to do it.
Federal studies back up concerns that ownership may be disguised. A 2013 audit found planes registered through trusts lacked key information about the true ownership of the planes. The review found major trust companies could not or would not provide the information on the aircraft they own. One of the companies cited in the 2013 audit investigation? None other than Aircraft Guarantee Corp.
What do we really know about the planes that fly over our homes?
After our investigation revealed the loopholes, federal authorities started asking questions too.
That's where the interest started. Your investigative reporting about these 1,100 planes being registered in Unalaska, Texas, that had no airport.
Prosecutor Ernest Gonzalez oversaw the investigation. Investigators wanted to know where were the rest of all those Unalaska planes and who was operating them. In April 2019, the government demanded that trust company owner Deborah Mercer Irwin produce information on all aircraft currently being operated overseas. The law says trust companies must know who is operating their aircraft, where it's located, and how it's being used. Officials say that didn't happen with Aircraft Guarantee Corp. They say Mercer Irwin broke the trust the government placed in her. Remember what she told us back in 2019?
We know who our clients are. We collect all the information.
So was her claim accurate?
Well, we found that not to be truthful.
A G2 jet packed with 70 bales of cocaine.
Federal investigators cited 4 drug planes registered through her company from 2020. 2 seized loaded with drugs, a third one burned on a clandestine airstrip in Venezuela, and the 4th shot down by the Venezuelan military.
They weren't doing any vetting at all, and some of these planes were being placed in the hands of drug traffickers, and she knew that.
And that's not all. When law enforcement seized some of the company's aircraft loaded with drugs, investigators say Mercer Irwin and her daughter, Kaylee Moffitt, sought to distance themselves by either deregistering them or transferring ownership.
We got the information the plane had landed.
Planes like this one. Prosecutors say it's an example of the shell game the company played with drug dealers. In December 2019, the Gulfstream changed ownership 3 times in one day. An aircraft museum sold the plane to a company prosecutors say was linked to the Sinaloa cartel. That company sold it to Heriberto Calderon Gastelum, a convicted drug smuggler, who then turned over ownership to Aircraft Guarantee Corp to register in trust.
A simple Google search would have shown that that individual had been prosecuted in the United States.
6 days after that, the plane flew to Mexico. And 67 days after that, authorities in Belize seized the plane loaded with cocaine.
I would find it very difficult for a criminal or a drug user to place their aircraft in trust.
What's Aircraft Guarantee's business model?
Well, if I was going to try and smuggle drugs, I would like to have an N-registered airplane, and it would be nice to have it registered to a trust where there's no accountability and traceability.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And
Massachusetts Congressman Stephen Lynch talked to us about his legislation that would require the identity of the real owner be on file with the FAA in an attempt to close the trust loophole.
we want someone to be held accountable, okay? We want to be able to put a person with that aircraft. If you're a foreign national, you have no connection with this country, you can register an aircraft here and the government doesn't know anything about it. I mean, come on.
While efforts in Congress stalled, prosecutors moved forward. In 2020, a grand jury indicted Aircraft Guarantee owner Deborah Mercer Irwin, Kaylee Moffitt, and 6 others in the aircraft industry. The indictment said Mercer Irwin and her daughter concealed the true ownership of aircraft.
There was occasions where the plane was put in trust. Then that plane was repeatedly sold after that to other individuals, and they had no idea who the truthful owner of that plane was.
Is this the offices of Aircraft Guarantee Court? After WFA's investigation spurred a federal criminal probe into Aircraft Guarantee, the government decided to expand its review to include dozens of other trust companies.
It would be foolhardy to think that this doesn't change things. I think this is a game changer for trust companies and other people in lessor situations to ensure that they are fully aware of who's operating their aircraft and do very comprehensive due diligence.
Aviation attorney David Hernandez works with trust companies.
They're terrified to think that they're going to be held accountable for what happens to a particular aircraft owned by one of their beneficial owners.
But investigators found something else that shocked them.
Digging into it further, it took a turn to something else.
We'll tell you about it when Broken Trust continues. Prosecutors say the investigation WFA started led to the discovery that Deborah Mercer Irwin and a business partner broke the trust in other ways.
We found that there was an individual by the name of Federico Machado that had purchased several planes, put them in trust with AGC, and several of his planes were involved in seizures. So he caught our attention.
Federal prosecutor Ernest Gonzalez says the investigation expanded to target Federico Machado, an accused international drug smuggler.
We proceeded to indict Mr. Machado, obtain financial records, and found the twist. The twist was that Mr. Machado and Ms. Mercer were involved in a Ponzi scheme.
So how'd it work? Investors wired deposits to escrow accounts at an aircraft title company owned by Mercer Irwin. That money was to be used as a fully refundable deposit so Machado could buy planes. In return, the investors were supposed to receive large fees. But prosecutors say the planes either didn't exist or weren't for sale, and Mercer Irwin and Machado pocketed millions.
The planes that they were asking the investors to place a deposit on didn't even exist. They were ghost planes. He even got individuals to pose as sellers of these planes. And they continued to do more plane deals to cover up the previous plane deals, which is your typical Ponzi scheme.
We wanted to ask Machado ourselves, so we dug into records, tracked down people who knew him, and we found him thousands of miles away from Onalaska under house arrest in his native Argentina.
I have a story to tell.
Machado's fighting extradition back to the United States on drug smuggling and fraud charges.
The way they portray me in the indictment, it's like you're now talking to a chatbot. I'm not saying, right? I made mistakes, but I'm not a narco trafficker.
So what about the Ponzi allegations?
It's a group of few people. So they thought they were investing in something. They invest in something else.
And where was all that investor money going? Not into buying planes, he told us, but rather his Guatemalan mining operation.
It's not lines of old ladies They got cheated, okay? It can't get fixed. God gave me my freedom. I will fix it. I will pay them back, and that's it. It has nothing to do with drugs.
Machado says he's far from a criminal. He's actually a humanitarian who gave the local indigenous people a better life through his financial deals.
It's a beautiful place in the middle of Guatemala with all these Indians, with all these little properties. We were giving jobs to the people. They were quite happy.
We asked Machado about the allegations that Mercer Irwin and her trust company registered planes for drug dealers.
Doesn't strike me that an old lady from Oklahoma is going to go and put airplanes under their name and carry that. It's just stupid. It made no sense to me.
But would it make sense to a jury? Deborah, you have anything to say about the upcoming trial? In April, the story that began in Onalaska moved to federal court in Sherman as Mercer Irwin went on trial. Never before had an aircraft trust company owner faced trial on accusations of putting planes into the hands of drug traffickers.
She certainly didn't fit the profile from a movie depicting Colombian narco traffickers. But in today's world, narco traffickers and transnational criminal organizations are made up of people like Mercer.
But it was the Ponzi scheme involving as many as 100 fake plane deals that took center stage at the trial's start. Hey, Deborah, the government says these plane deals never happened. What do you say to that? WFA confirmed that investors lost at least $240 million. And there was a secret ledger kept by Machado and Mercer Irwin showing she made at least $4.9 million. Machado pocketed $75 million. Mercer Irwin told jurors Machado would borrow money and he'd repay by borrowing more money. The prosecutor repeatedly asked, "Is that a Ponzi scheme?" She finally responded, "I'll say yes."
The Ponzi scheme, the phantom aircraft transactions, the money laundering are all facilitated by the anonymity of the trust system.
Prosecutors argued Mercer Irwin turned a blind eye and ignored warnings her planes were being used by drug traffickers. In 2020, a month before the Belize plane became the biggest seizure in that nation's history, another aircraft guarantee jet loaded with nearly 2 tons of cocaine landed in a Guatemalan jungle. Machado sent Mercer Irwin a message telling her, "Your plane rescued from the landing strip in Guatemala." Her response? It's no longer registered. She did not tell the U.S. government it'd been seized.
That plane just simply showed up into Guatemala in the middle of the jungle, but yet the owners of the plane never asked for their plane to be returned.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel Jesus Romero served as a naval intelligence officer. He arrived in Guatemala in 2017. He testified at Mercer Irwin's trial.
We were not prepared for the amount of aircraft that came in through Guatemala and Belize and Honduras.
Romero said drug traffickers used jets that could carry several tons of cocaine worth $200 million or more. Cartels flew in-registered aircraft from Mexico to cocaine-producing countries in South America to be loaded. Then the planes flew to clandestine airstrips in Central America before being smuggled to the United States. If the jets crashed, it was the cost of doing business.
The amounts of planes that were coming into the region were creating mass chaos. They were creating lots of violence.
So what happened after Mercer Irwin's 2020 indictment?
We saw direct disruptions to cocaine air trafficking. Periods of 30 to 90 days where we didn't see a single aircraft. We attribute that as a result of aircraft guarantees indictment. That caused the biggest disruption to the cocaine flow.
Over 2 days, high-ranking Latin American officials testified they also saw drug flights fall from hundreds annually down to just a few. A Colombian Air Force lieutenant colonel told jurors that after the indictment, the number of jets carrying drugs in the Caribbean dropped 59% from 2020 to 2022. The impact, he says, an estimated $1 billion loss to drug cartels.
As soon as this case was indicted, the effect was immediate. the number of planes with drugs diminished considerably.
After a day and a half of deliberations, the 12-member jury convicted Mercer Irwin of being a drug trafficker. They also convicted her in the Ponzi scheme. She left in handcuffs and shackles, escorted by U.S. Marshals.
The jury got to see how drug trafficking works, how everybody plays a part. This is a unique case in the United States, one involving airplane trust that no one had been paying any attention to. Obviously, your piece, WFAA's piece, was instrumental in giving us the focus to see what exactly was going on. It is a landmark case.
The same week Mercer Irwin's trial began, Congressman Lynch reintroduced the Aircraft Ownership Transparency Act. Recall that it would require the real owners of planes held in trust be on file with the FAA.
I go back to what your local registry of motor vehicles requires. The requirements should be at least as great to register an aircraft, right?
Mercer Irwin now awaits sentencing, and she faces up to life in prison. Her daughter, Kaylee Moffitt, took a plea deal for 5 years probation. A federal judge also signed an order authorizing the government to seize as much as $50 million from Mercer Irwin. All this spurred by questions we began asking about those planes registered in the tiny town of Onalaska. I wanted to come back and talk to Zachary Davies. He was the person that we talked to back then, and I just wanted to hear what he thought about what happened.
I thought you drove 4 hours on a story that I really just couldn't wrap my mind around because it didn't make any sense. On Alaska, Texas, we got no airport. I'm thinking, what's really going on?
Zachary Davies now serves on the Onalaska City Council.
One of the biggest just shockers for me is we had this under our nose the entire time, and everything was real quiet until it wasn't. All hell broke loose.